Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day. Before we dive in, standard disclaimer, nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And today's guest is the co-founder of Tezos, the blockchain that runs XU308, a platform that enables investors to own and trade U308 by administering fractional ownership of physical uranium in the form of a smart contract ledger. Very excited to dive into that as well as the uranium industry as a whole. It's Arthur Breitman. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I want to start with a macro overview of the uranium sector at present and ask, what are the main themes and trends that you're currently watching when it comes to uranium markets and nuclear energy that you think more investors should be paying attention to?
I mean, I think the main theme is, if you're paying attention to uranium, this is not going to be news, but for everyone out there who might be curious about uranium, the main theme is there's been a U-turn in terms of the focus on nuclear power. A couple of years ago, you had Germany closing down its last nuclear power plants. Now, for the first time, people are building nuclear power plants again. There's lots are being built in China. New ones are being built in the US. Old ones are being reopened, and a lot of that has been driven by the need for massive demand for power coming out of, or at least a forecasted demand for power coming out of the AI sector. It was also a long time coming, I would say, because attitudes toward nuclear power had shifted over the years. By and large, the attitude against it stemmed from the risk of proliferation, so people living through the Cold War or the Chernobyl accidents. People have been focused more on decarbonization as a focus for the environment. And so as a result, there was a regain of interest in nuclear power. And if you were looking at the trends, popularity of nuclear power, specifically in the US among Democratic voters, had a clear breakdown between younger and older voters. So it was going to come, but definitely the demand from the AI industry have been a huge accelerant. At the same time, there's been continuous underinvestment in uranium mining because it was seen as an energy sector in decline, especially after the incidents with Fukushima. So there's been underinvestment, and as a result, all of a sudden you have this U-turn, and all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, we need all this uranium now for all of this capacity that's being built. It also, it takes time to build nuclear power plants, but it also takes time to build up the mining supply. There's also a geopolitical bifurcation. There used to be a single market. Now there's been a U.S. ban on Russian enriched uranium, so we may see also a split between maybe like a Russian Kazakhstan type of uranium and the U.S. and Canada one. So those are the main theme in the market.
Yeah, and a lot of speculation that Kazakhstan, the world's largest uranium producer, perhaps most of that supply will end up going to Russia and China in the future, to speak to that bifurcation you were talking about. We have also seen a number of big technology companies get behind nuclear, which with the latest headline being Meta signing a 20-year agreement with Constellation Energy to purchase power from a nuclear power plant in Illinois. Of course, we also have Amazon signing a deal with Talon Energy to draw nearly 2 gigawatts of electricity from a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. The list goes on in terms of big companies in the tech space, a lot of them getting involved in the small modular reactor space as well. How do you think all of
Amazon
this
could... Amazon as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
AWS,
How do you think all of this could affect uranium demand moving forward?
So the interesting thing is that fuel is at least important. Fuel is like not a big part of your cost as a nuclear power plant. Like the main cost is building the whole thing and securing the whole thing, getting all the permit and all of that. And so your number one expense, you could say, is amortizing the massive capital investment you made. And so if the price of uranium is 2, 5, 10 times more expensive, you're still going to buy it. You're not going to say, oops, uranium is too expensive, I'm not going to rent my plant. So there's very little price elasticity of demand for uranium. At some point, of course, it kicks in, but it takes a while.
And then when it comes to the Fukushima nuclear disaster, which you touched on, Chernobyl, et cetera, it seemed like around that Until fairly recently, the whole world was condemning nuclear power. You also mentioned Germany shutting down its last operating reactor, something that now there's talk that perhaps that will be reversed. It used to be that those wanting to build more nuclear plants were considered crazy. And now those who don't want to build nuclear power plants, people are starting to look at them with suspicion, like, what's wrong with you? Do you have an agenda? What do you make of this complete shift in sentiment when it comes to nuclear energy?
It was sudden. To be fair, I started buying some uranium in 2021 because and this was before I would say there was this turn, and I thought when the war between Russia and Ukraine broke out, and specifically when it became clear that Europe had this dependency on gas from Russia, I thought that would be a huge accelerant for uranium at the time, and it didn't happen. And in fact, even after some information came to light that Russia had been influencing German politics on the shutdown of nuclear power plants, they still went ahead and kept shutting down the power plants. That was very surprising to me, and the demand from the demand from AI and the data centers, that has been a much more powerful force in flipping this over. So I thought that was quite surprising how quickly that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are your thoughts on countries who are still kind of a country like Germany? Now they're talking about potentially doing a U-turn, reinstating nuclear power. Spain, I believe, is moving in the same direction. Belgium potentially as well. Austria. These are countries that have traditionally been very opposed to it. Do you think we're eventually going to see a complete shift, and all of these countries are going to get on board the nuclear train?
I mean, even if some don't, at the end of the day, power is fungible, especially in a dense area like Europe. People will buy from the neighbors, even if they don't. I also don't think that the future is all nuclear. I think solar keeps getting cheaper, solar keeps getting bigger. So a lot of the grid, I think, is going to be solar and solar plus batteries. But nuclear is, it has a large part to play.
Yeah, absolutely. You need that base load power to be able to work with the intermittent energy sources like solar. I want to talk about the uranium market in terms of its pricing because it's notoriously opaque in that sense. There is a futures market that doesn't really work. The spot market only accounts for around 10% of transacted volumes annually, but it is the most frequently updated. And so investors tend to look at that. And then there's the long term contracting market, which most would say is a much more accurate gauge of the overall supply demand fundamentals. However, a lot of those contracts have NDAs attached to them, so we don't actually get the details on the pricing. How do you wrap your head around such a complex market dynamic?
I think that the thing is, like, and the ambition, I would say, is to create this market, like to create this very, very active spot market where, price discovery actually happens. Like you want to make that's one of the things where large global markets are good for, is price discovery and making it happen. And if you can get, not just institutions, but also hedge funds, or even retail participating in that, you actually create the conditions and the liquidity for this price discovery to happen. And yeah, you're right. Like spot is basically 10%. You have to like buy it in still like huge increments. That even for a hedge fund, that might be like a big position. So there's a lot to be done here.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue into discussing XU308 because there are not a lot of ways currently for investors to gain exposure to physical uranium. There's like the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, that's the main one, a few Yellow Cake PLC listed in London, but that's basically it for most retail investors. So let's talk about how XU308 changes the game in that respect. Could you start by giving us an overview of the platform and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So X308 is a tokenized ownership of physical uranium. So it's physical uranium stored with Cameco. It's uranium oxide, also known as yellow cake or U308. And essentially, the token represents the beneficial ownership of a fraction of it. And that's mostly it. And you can buy it in very small increments. You could buy a few cents worth of it if you wanted. It's quoted per, like, the quote is, one token is roughly an ounce. So like, $4 and some change. I think it's up recently because I think like the organization behind Sprott went out and bought $200 million like
Yes.
very recently.
Yeah.
So it's up a bit, but it's roughly there. But even if you wanted to buy a fraction of a cent, you could still do that. It's globally accessible. There's I would say the main benefit of doing crypto rails is the difference between starting a brick and mortar business or starting an online business. You could create a financial product somewhere and then put it on an exchange somewhere, and then now you've catered to one market, or you can put it on blockchain rails, and all of a sudden you have this global availability. And I think that's one of the main value prop of the technology. So you can access it directly on uranium.io with a crypto wallet, buy it, trade it with stable coins that's available. You could also use Archax, which is an exchange here in the UK, and there's more venues which are forthcoming for this. There's also some custodian. So we're still at the beginning of the product. The whole point of this rail is that it gives you access to a whole ecosystem where you should be able to use it as collateral for loans. You should be able to change your custodians, change trading venues, have all of that. That's what the technology brings to the assets.
And do you think this could also open up, investing in uranium to a whole new category of retail investor, that being the crypto crowd? Because I think this is a group of people who would definitely be interested in the supply demand story for uranium, but perhaps they're not traditional equity investors. So I would imagine potentially XU308 kind of being able to access a whole new group of potential investors out there.
Yeah, I think there's good impedance match. And in the past, when people have done tokenization projects, they've been very focused on the blockchain aspect, not so much as Rails, but more as a distribution channel. Saying like, hey, geez, there's a lot of people with lots of silly money in crypto. Surely they will want to buy this or that. And most of the time, no. And I would say it's because the assets didn't really match the interest of the crowd. Now, what do we know about people who like cryptocurrencies? They like technology, and they like to live in the future. They like commodities, and they like volatility. Well, uranium has all three. So from that perspective, I think it's in as much as in as much as a real asset is going to match the interest of a crypto crowd, it's pretty close to it.
I definitely agree with that. Now, a lot of viewers of this show are gold and silver stackers. And of course, there's a saying in that community, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. Now, of course, holding one's own physical uranium is not possible. But how can holders of XU308 rest assured that the uranium they own is secure and is actually there?
Yeah, great question. And so it depends what you're hedging for, right? There's different scenarios where like you would want to have the physical gold. And also it's also a matter, of cost. Is like, well, how big of an issue is it to take custody of your gold? That's not, maybe it's not that big of a problem. So you might as well. So everything's a trade-off. Here, you're not really banking on, it's, like everything is going to go to shit and it's going to be terrible. And I'm going to have to run my own nuclear power plant in my backyard. And so I need the uranium. That's probably not going to happen. If that's what you're concerned about, you're better off building solar panels on your farm.
Yeah.
Or I had a friend as well who had on his property, he had a gas well. That was interesting.
Wow.
as a form of, for being self-sufficient. But how do you know it's there? So there are attestations that can be found on the website. I think the one on the website right now is a bit old. So we're working to like make it more often. But you have an attestation from a trustee that has an account with Cameco showing that yes, so the trustee has to guarantee that they have this position on Cameco. You can, of course, observe the blockchain, see the transaction, but then ultimately you have to trust that Cameco as a depository does hold the OCO that it says it holds. It is a very big institution. It's very regulated. It's very well audited. So I think you can be fairly confident in that, but it is, of course, there's a degree of trust that is required that would not be required if you compared to, say, owning gold in your backyard.
Yeah. And Cameco obviously being the bellwether of the uranium sector, the most recognized publicly traded uranium company on the planet, I would say, maybe outside of Kazatomprom, but Kazatomprom, there you have potential issues with the bifurcation geopolitically, as you mentioned. So I think Cameco is about as good of a custodian as it gets in the uranium world. I want to dive deeper into how XU308 is priced. This is a quote from your website. It says, the approved XU308 trading venues serve as price discovery venues. There is no formal peg to the spot price of uranium. Market makers and other arbitrageurs that are increasing the approved XU308 trading venues are likely to maintain broad alignment to the OTC spot market. Can you walk us through the details a little bit more on how price discovery works?
Absolutely. So there's a few places where that trade. It can trade directly on the blockchain itself. So there's a smart contract that where you can exchange it for stable coins back and forth. You can also trade it on Artrax, I was mentioning. Now the price is going to have is whatever price it trades at. If all of a sudden everyone wants to buy the token, that token might be for a period of time priced higher than where the OTC spot market is trading at. Now, when that happens with something like the Sprott traded product, which is like essentially a closed-end fund, there's no mechanism where you, as a user, can bring the NAV in line with the share price. You have to rely on a fund manager to actually go and say, oh, wow, this is trading at a premium. I guess I'm going to go buy some uranium and sell some more shares, or vice versa. It's traded at a discount. And that's why it can persist. Here you can do an arbitrage. And of course, to do the arbitrage, you need to have access to the spot market. Okay, so you need to be able to do it in big sizes. But you are able to go and say, I'm going to buy $4 million worth of uranium, OTC, and I'm going to turn that into tokens, and I'm going to be able to sell those tokens in the market. Or vice versa, you could take those tokens and say, hey, I have those tokens, please credit my please transfer that to my account at Cameco and retire the tokens. So you have this creation and redemption mechanism, which ultimately means that arbitrager can keep the price in line. So it doesn't mean that it's going to be exactly OTC, but it can't stray too far for too long without people being able to bring it back in line via arbitrage.
Could you give us some insight into current market activity for XU308? Are you seeing a lot of activity on the platform? How do you plan to expand usage in the future and attract more market participants?
It's a baby market for now, right? There's a few $1 million that have been tokenized, maybe a few thousand users. So very, very small baby market. We've approached some institutions who are interested in it, but of course, they're going cautiously. They really want to understand, the entire setup. They're doing a lot of due diligence, but hopefully, we bring a lot more of these people in and let the product shine. Also, like I mentioned, there's more venues which are forthcoming, which should bring distribution and more visibility and more interest. So still a baby market, but very glad that the product is out. And I think with more visibility and more distribution, it should grow. And like I said, ultimately, the goal is ambitious. The goal is to make it the vehicle by which the price discovery happens for the market.
Yeah, that's interesting because there is no real operating futures market. Like we said, the spot market is the most updated, but it's not a very accurate barometer of the true value of uranium. So the potential for something like XU308 to create the main impetus of price discovery in the uranium market is super fascinating. Certainly ambitious, but not out of the question. And the project seems really fascinating. Well, before I let you go, is there anything we haven't yet covered about XU308 or anything you'd like to emphasize about it that you think people out there should know?
Well, I'll just make a point, and it might be a pedantic point, but it's an important point, and it relates to what you were saying about about arbitrage. Sometimes people say, "Haha, but can you take physical delivery?" And the answer is yes, of course. Not everyone, not everyone. But if you couldn't take physical delivery, then there would be no economic link to the value of uranium. Like someone needs to be able to take physical delivery at some point for this product to make sense. Now, if you wanted to do that, you would have to convert back the token into a deposit at Cameco, and then you would have to show up at Cameco, and then you would have to take delivery. But for that, of course, you need to be properly licensed to do this. You probably need to be a nuclear power plant operator. So you and I cannot show up and take physical delivery, but some people can, and that's an important part of the thing. Otherwise, you don't really have a meaningful asset.
Yeah, that is a really good point, actually. Well, Arthur, this has been a fantastic conversation. Very interesting project. I'm going to put uranium.io in the description below so people can check it out. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a blast.
Thanks for having me.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.